becoming a situation of complete and total lawlessness.
The troops join hundreds of federal agents already deployed, while the Trump administration is taking control of the local police department.
Imagine waking up in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., only to find the streets lined with National Guard troops and federal agents in full tactical gear. The sound of helicopters hums overhead. Armored vehicles are parked on corners, and the police force you've known all your life is suddenly under federal control. This isn't the setting of a dystopian movie, it's reality in 2025. After former President Donald Trump ordered the deployment of hundreds of federal forces in the D.C., declaring what he called a crime emergency. But here's the twist. Official crime data tells a completely different story. Violent crime isn't surging, it's actually dropping at some of the fastest rates in decades. So why was this massive show of force really necessary, and what does it mean for the balance of power between local and federal government? Stick around, because today we're diving deep into the clash between politics, policing, and perception in America's capital. Before we get started, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss these breakdowns of the biggest stories shaping our world right now. And now, let's get into it. The images coming out of Washington this week are striking. Rows of uniformed troops stationed across the city, officers in federal tactical gear guarding intersections, and a new so-called emergency police commissioner installed at the top of the city's chain of command. According to the Trump administration, this was all about tackling what they claimed was spiraling crime in the capital. Republican governors from several states even sent their own National Guard units to back up the effort, painting a picture of a city on the brink. On the surface, this looked like an urgent response to chaos. But when you look closer at the numbers, the reality tells a much more complicated and controversial story. Official data from D.C.'s own Metropolitan Police Department paints a very different picture of crime in 2025. Far from exploding, crime is actually falling, and not by small margins. Violent crime is down an astonishing 27% compared to last year. Homicides have fallen by 12%, robberies have plummeted by 30%. And overall crime across the city has dipped by about 7%. These aren't numbers that point to an emergency, they're numbers that suggest progress. And it's not just a fluke of the last few months either. This trend has been ongoing. In fact, back in 2024, violent crime fell by 35% compared to the year before, reaching its lowest levels in more than 3 decades. So the real question becomes, if crime was already dropping, why did the White House declare an emergency and send in the troops? The answer depends on who you ask. For Trump and his allies, the move was framed as protecting citizens from danger and showing strength in the face of lawlessness. For D.C. officials, including Mayor Muriel Bowser, this was nothing short of federal overreach. She and other city leaders insist that not only was crime already trending downward, but that the city had the situation under control. To them, this wasn't about safety at all. It was about politics, power, and optics. The deployment, they argue, undermined local authority, federalized their police force without consent, and created the perception of a crisis that didn't match reality. Now, here's where things get even more complicated. While the city is celebrating lower crime rates, the U.S. Justice Department has launched an investigation into allegations that D.C. police might have manipulated some of those very statistics. Mayor Bowser has strongly denied any wrongdoing, but the investigation has added another layer of tension, leaving residents to wonder, is crime really dropping as fast as officials say, or are the numbers being massaged to look better? That uncertainty has fueled a broader debate, giving Trump and his supporters ammunition to argue that federal intervention was necessary, while opponents see it as nothing more than manufactured justification for a political show of force. The bigger issue here isn't just the numbers, it's about the precedent this sets. Washington, D.C. is unique. It isn't a state, and that makes it more vulnerable to federal intervention. Unlike New York, Los Angeles, or Chicago, D.C. doesn't have the same degree of autonomy. For years, local leaders have pushed for statehood precisely because they don't want the federal government stepping in whenever it chooses. What we're seeing now is exactly the kind of situation they've been warning about. A local police force taken out of local hands, replaced with a federally appointed commander, and troops patrolling neighborhoods not because of actual crime rates, but because of political calculations. And think about the human side of this. Imagine being a D.C. resident who has spent the last year feeling safer, watching violent crime steadily decline, only to suddenly see military vehicles rolling down your street. What kind of message does that send? Instead of celebrating progress, it instills fear. Instead of building trust between communities and local law enforcement, it creates tension between citizens and outsiders in uniform. Critics argue that this kind of heavy-handed response can actually backfire, making communities less safe in the long run by eroding the relationships that help police prevent crime in the first place. But to Trump supporters, the optics are exactly the point. They believe showing overwhelming force sends a signal, not just to DC, but to the entire country, that law and order is a top priority. It's part of a broader political strategy that has long played well with his base, the idea of being tough on crime, no matter what the data says. So what does that leave us now? On one side, we have hard statistics that show violent crime falling in DC, part of a national trend where many big cities are also experiencing decreases. On the other, we have a federal deployment that frames the capital as a city in crisis. The truth is, both the numbers and the optics matter. The statistics show reality, but the optics shape perception. And perception is often what drives politics. And that brings us back to the heart of the debate. Is this really about public safety, or is it about politics and control? On the other hand, there are some voices in support. Certain Republican governors not only endorsed the move, but also sent additional National Guard units to reinforce the Capitol. They argue that crime numbers alone don't tell the full story, that residents still feel unsafe, that gang activity and drug networks remain active, and that the perception of crime can be just as destabilizing as crime itself. And that's a valid point. Perception shapes reality, especially in politics. When people believe their neighborhoods are unsafe, even in the face of falling statistics, pressure mounts for leaders to act. But here's the twist. The Justice Department has opened its own investigation into whether DC police might have manipulated some of those very statistics. Mayor Bowser has strongly denied any wrongdoing, but the investigation has added another layer of tension, leaving residents to wonder, is crime really dropping as fast as officials say, or are the numbers being massaged to look better? That uncertainty has fueled the broader debate, giving Trump and his supporters ammunition to argue that federal intervention was necessary, while opponents see it as nothing more than manufactured justification for a political show of force. Now let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. What's happening in DC isn't just about one city. It's a snapshot of a much larger national debate. Across America, violent crime surged during the early 2020s, but has been on a consistent decline since 2023. Major cities like New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles have all reported double-digit drops in violent offenses. That's why many experts say this deployment feels out of step with the actual data. But politically, it fits into a broader strategy, highlighting fear, emphasizing danger, and positioning federal power as the ultimate solution. And make no mistake, this is about more than just crime. It's about control, authority, and the balance of power between local governments and the federal system. For decades, Washington, D.C. has fought for statehood to gain equal footing with the rest of the country. But this move, essentially stripping power from the city's leadership, pushes that dream further out of reach and reopens a conversation Americans have been avoiding,